Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our session on the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. My name's Philip, and I'll be your guide for this session. So if you've joined us live, appreciate it. If you're in the lounge, as you know, you can get into class live, or you can ask questions through via chat. And if you're live streaming and want to get more involved in classes, please look at the features of GetSetUp. So you can join classes and act interactively. So again, my name's Philip. James is also here from GetSetUp. He's in the background. If you have any technical questions or challenges, just chat with James, and we'll continue the class. And he'll also help monitor the questions coming through chat. So I appreciate that so much. So a few more people are starting to pop in, but let's go ahead and get started. For those of you that are on time. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about Frank Lloyd Wright, probably, according to most architectural experts, the most influential and well-known American architect. What we're going to do to view some of his architecture is we're going to look through the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We're going to use those. There's 8 buildings of Frank Lloyd Wright's that are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Then we're going to detail and view each of those 8 structures, go through them, and we'll just, throughout the whole course, just talk about any interest you have in Frank Lloyd Wright architecture and what brings you to this particular class. So if you want to just let us know by unmuting yourself or maybe putting in the chat how many, if any, Frank Lloyd Wright structures you have visited in person. Just be an interesting tidbit to learn and find out as we go through. And I love these sessions to be interactive, either with comments from you, if you've seen some of these houses, or with questions as we go through the session. It makes it a lot more engaging and interesting for everyone involved. So please feel free to make this as interactive as we can, using the chat and or your microphone. So let's just briefly talk about Frank Lloyd Wright. So as you can see on the screen, he was born in 1867 in Richland Center, Wisconsin. So if you were to look at a map of Wisconsin, and it's and divide it into 4 quadrangles, it is in the lower right quadrangle. So in the general area where Milwaukee and Madison are, is a little bit north of that area. And he lived to a good age of 91, almost 92. As you can see, he dies in Phoenix, Arizona, and we'll figure out why he's in Phoenix when he dies as we go through and talk about some of the structures. And at the time when he dies, he was actually still a working or a practicing architect. He was actually building the Guggenheim Museum at the time that he passes away. And that's one of the 8 structures we're going to view. So it'll be the last structure we view as we go through this session today. Wright had a very limited formal education. There's no record he ever graduates from high school. He does get a special dispensation and goes to the University of Wisconsin for 2 semesters, studies engineering. After the 2nd semester, he immediately comes down to Chicago and apprentices for approximately 7 years with 3 different architectural firms, the most famous being Louis Sullivan of Adler and Sullivan, who is helping to recreate downtown Chicago and the high rises after the Great Chicago Fire in the early 1870s. So any questions on Wright at all? So far, he becomes most famous for what he called prairie style of architecture. We're going to look at some of the houses we're going to look at, structures we're going to look at will be the prairie style. He also had something he called organic architecture, where everything flowed together. The outside of the house, the landscape, the inside, the furniture, everything is flowing together. He designed, according to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, he designed just under 1,200 buildings in his career. of which 460 of them were actually constructed while Wright was alive. And 76 of those houses also were demolished while Wright was still alive. A few more were built after he passed away that he had designed, and a few more had been torn down after he passed away. But those numbers give the exact details from the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. So the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So UNESCO is the cultural, scientific, and educational arm of the United Nations. They have a system where they consider different structures around the world to have outstanding universal value, have global context, and are preserved in whole or in part. And then they decide to make certain structures World Heritage Sites. There are just over 1,100 structural sites that are UNESCO World Heritage Sites at this time. They consider new buildings every year. In 2019, 8 of Wright's structures were packaged together, and we're looking at on our screen now those 8 structures. They were packaged together and are considered the 20th century architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, and together are one UNESCO World Heritage Site. There are 24 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United States. Half of them are actually not man-made, so things like Everglades National Park, the Great Smoky Mountains, the Grand Canyon. And so there's only 11 other structures plus these that are UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United States. So we're going to use this as our reference. The order of these buildings we're going to talk about is the order of when they were built. UNESCO specifically gave Wright this designation, they said, for 4 reasons. For his geometric aberrations. So we can see a lot of that right here in these pictures of these 8 structures. He blurred the inside and the outside. We'll see more of that as we go into each of these houses and structures and look at them. You can see a little blurring here in Falling Waters, most famous structure. We're going to see a lot of blurring in the Roby House and in Taliesin also. He's rooted in nature's forms and principles. He was very much a nature lover and uses nature for a lot of inspiration. And he was responsive to the evolving American experience. And by that, I think the easiest way to discuss that is the fact that some of the concepts he and his team come up with in the first decade of the 20th century, in 1900 to 1910, are still things we are using in our houses today. Great rooms, big open areas and entry areas comes from Frank Lloyd Wright. Having a formal and informal dining area, now mostly called the breakfast nook, comes from Wright and his team. Attaching garages to houses, early concept of his, which obviously is very common and suggested now. So those are just some of the concepts that he comes up with that we're still using today in our houses. So any questions, comments before we start looking at these structures? All right, so the first structure we're going to look at is Unity Temple. So it's a Unitarian church. It is still a church. It's still a practicing church, still owned by the Unitarians. So this is completed in Oak Park, Illinois. Frank Lloyd Wright was in the early part of his career when this structure was built, was based in Oak Park. His family was Unitarian. This was actually the church that he and his family visited. In 1904, the church that was on this piece of property burned down, and Wright was given the commission to rebuild the church. So as you can see from this view of the outside, it does not look like a typical church. Oak Park Avenue, where this picture is taken from and where the church sits on a piece of property right on top of Oak Park, was a very busy street, a noisy street back when this structure was built, and it's still a busy, noisy street. So Wright wants to take away some of that noise. And as you can see, there really is not much as the way of windows, etc., that we can see from the main part of the church. It would seem to make it a very dark structure, but as we go inside in a couple of seconds, you'll see that it is actually fairly airy and open. So this is a picture of the inside of the church, looking from the pulpit out into where the congregates would sit. As you can see, there are congregates on 3 sides of the pulpit, and this is a unique concept. This church holds about 400 people under normal circumstances, but no one congregate is more than 40 feet away from the pulpit in the way it's built. Even though this is very early in Wright's career, it's considered to be very acoustically sound. As a matter of fact, in the winter time, they sometimes give some string quartet concerts here that are very enjoyable. The next one, we're going to look at some of the lights. We talked about the high windows we could see from the outside, or where my cursor is now. And then you can see there's a multitude of skylights and then some artificial lighting that hangs down pretty low and brings it up into the community of participants. So that lighting that we thought might be pretty dark, Wright comes away from that and is able to bring a lot of light into the structure, mostly natural, but also some artificial light. So this is the opposite view that we saw a minute ago. It's from where the congregates are sitting, looking up into the altar. And again, typical to Wright, he makes his own variation of what an altar in the pulpit looks like, and different than what most of us are used to. This, to the best of my knowledge, is the only church he builds for quite some time, but in the next 20 years or so, I don't believe he builds any other churches, but in the last 30 years or so of his career, he does build about 6 or 7 other churches. They all look different, and some of them are very unique, on cliffs built into rocks, and then also some right in the middle of big cities. Also, so a variety of churches that were built, and synagogues, I should add. So on the other side of the church is a community room, and you can see it follows some of the same structures. It's got different but skylights. Some of the lightings are the same. And back here where my cursor is a low middle area. And this is where you enter the church and community center. So the doors I'm pointing out here, and then there's some doors on the other side also that you can enter the church into, with a space in between. So it's made so it's acoustically quiet between the community space and the church, so you can use the community space at the same time that you are having a service. The church itself is behind this wall where my cursor is now. What we just saw is basically back behind this particular wall that we have, and that's the sound barrier that he uses in regards to separating the two. As we saw from the outside, it is actually poured concrete. It's one of the first, if not the first building that uses that poured concrete as an example, according to architectural historians. So questions, comments, concerns, anything else you want to add about the church?
No, I was actually there. I'm trying to remember the year. I'm looking it up. It says they began restoring it, doing some construction in spring of 2015. And it wasn't done for a couple of years. So I must have been there in that period, because it was they were just starting to do the construction. So we walked through, but it didn't look anything like this when I was there.
Right. So the architectural renovation experts in Chicago, one team called, I'm on a blank on his name now, Harbaugh, is the one that actually, his team of architects and engineers are the ones that redid this. And they also redid the next one. We're going to see the Roby House in a minute. And both of them are absolutely immaculate in regards to it. Yes, seeing this church both before and after that restoration that you're talking about shows a gigantic difference in the two. I've been both before and after, and it is a wonderful difference in between it. The bones of the building really were never changed, but just being able to bring the colors back in and do some structural changes, minor structural changes to bring it back to its original shape are really interesting. thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I wish, are they open again? I know with COVID, everything's weird. Are Unity and Roby House open again, or?
Yep. So there's different answers as to, so that the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, which is a non-for-profit based in Chicago, gives tours of both these, the Unity Temple and the Roby House, which we're going to see next. So in the Unity Temple, the church obviously is the driver of what happens with the tours. So they just started doing tours again in May of this year. They had been closed since the pandemic. The church was completely closed and therefore not able to give tours. In May, late May of this year, so just basically a month ago, they started giving tours again. So it is now available to tour if you are in or visiting the Chicago area. So for those not familiar, Oak Park is the first suburb immediately west of downtown Chicago from that standpoint. So in the Roby House was closed for a shorter period of time. The Roby House is actually on the University of Chicago campus and is owned by the University of Chicago. Again, the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust gives tours of it, and they closed for approximately, I don't know the exact number, but for about 5 or 6 months after the main part of the pandemic, they were closed. And then they started giving limited tours with smaller groups. And then early this year, they went back to the full set of groups. I'm actually a tour guide at Roby, and I've given hundreds of tours of this house. So feel free to pepper me with any questions. I hopefully can answer them as we go through. So the Roby House is built for Frederick and Laura Roby. As you can see, completed in 1910. This by most is considered to be the ultimate in prairie style of house. We talked about it before. They're prairie style of houses are considered to be very long, very horizontal, not very tall. This is a 3-story house, and you can see it doesn't really stretch up too high. So that was Wright's answer to wanting the outside of his houses to match the environment of where they're built. He felt very long, very horizontal houses would match the flat Midwest. And that's what he evolves for the first 6 or 7 years of his career. He builds houses that on the outside look pretty much like all others. And then he starts elongating the houses for the next 7 or 8 years. The Roby House is considered to be not only the best in prairie style, but also the last prairie style of house he builds. Because as this house is being built, he leaves the Chicago area from where he lives. And then, but more importantly, he doesn't get many commissions in the Chicago area afterwards. And as he builds other houses in other parts of the country, he immediately has them, the outside of the house, match the environment of where they're built, or at least his interpretation of the environment of where they're built. So the Roby House, now this is a picture of the main living area. This is actually up on the 2nd floor, which is relatively common for prairie style of houses to have the main entertainment area up on the 2nd floor. Wright considers this to be one big entertainment area. We see what most of us would be considered the living room. And then there is a fireplace and the mantle going here. It would appear to be blocking from the other room, but Wright just considers this to be a divider, and he considered that one big room. The next room is the dining room, the next area, which is on the other side of the fireplace wall, as you can see. And so what he does is he puts this hole in the fireplace, you can see obviously from either side, and that allows you to look through this hole no matter what side of the room you're on, and realize that the other side has all the same type of architecture and ornamentation through the ceiling, through the lights. And then the row of windows, which runs, there are 12 sets of windows that run 48 feet along the outside wall of the house that also unify these two sub areas into one big room. And then this is an up close view of 3 of those 12 sets of windows. And then you can see the landscape outside. This entire 48-foot length wall is a flower bed. And remember, we talked about the UNESCO World Heritage Site, talked about how we blur the inside and the outside, right? Like to bring landscape up into the house was something he was very much interested in doing. Roby's had 2 young children. Mrs. Roby is very concerned about their safety. So as you go to the top of the stairs leading up to the 3rd floor where the bedrooms were, you can see this is original to the house, built in 1910, a baby gate built in with a locking mechanism here and the same structural ornamentation that you would see throughout the rest of the house. So just an early version of the baby gate. Wright does not invent the baby gate, but a patent is given to it in 1906. So I believe this is one of the earliest baby gates originally built into a house. If there's no other questions, we'll next go to up to Wisconsin, to Spring Green, Wisconsin, and tour Taliesin. So this is Wright's home. This is the home that he builds after he leaves the Chicago area. He tours Europe for a couple of years, then comes back to the general area where he was born and raised in Spring Green, Wisconsin. And some people call this building Taliesin III. The reason is that Taliesin is originally built. The house was burned in 1914. An arson fire was actually set by a disgruntled a disgruntled worker. And Wright was out of town on some business, but his then lady friend, mistress, however you want to code her, and her children were all perished in the fire. He set the fire and then blocked the access to get out outside. Wright immediately builds the house back. And then in 1925, there was an electrical fire that again burns the house down, and Wright rebuilds it for the 3rd time, basically using the same blueprint flooring plan, obviously some changes throughout the house. And he continues to make changes to this house. There's over 200 documented changes to the house after the structure, the 3rd structure was built in 1925. So the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation owns this house. And they also own Taliesin West, which we're going to see in a few minutes. And we'll talk more about that and what happened. So Wright lives in this house from the mid 19 teens. And then when he builds Taliesin West, he migrates between the 2 houses, using this house in the summer and early fall, late spring, summer, and early fall, and then is out in Arizona for the rest of the year. So he continues to use this house until he passes away. So Taliesin means shining brow in it's a Welsh word. Wright is Welsh by ancestry. And he says it's really of the hill. As you can see, he's up high, but he's not at the top of the hill. And he thinks it's coming from of the hill itself. So this is the main living room area within Taliesin. And you can see some similar characteristics that we saw in Roby House, lots of windows. These now, he does not use art glass windows. These are plain windows, but he has lots of windows, lots of views. We'll continue to see that in some of his other private residences that he builds as we tour the rest of these structures. So next, we're going to go all the way out west to Los Angeles. This is called the Hollyhock House. So the originator of this house is a oil heiress by the name of Arlene Barnsdell. Her favorite flower was the hollyhock. And so what Wright has created up here, hundreds of replications. This is his version of the hollyhock. And you can see it's really around the entire outside of the house. Here at the 2 corners are 2 real hollyhocks, as you can see from when I visited and took these pictures. But it becomes the name of the Hollyhock House. Miss Barnsdall really was not infatuated with this house, depending on exactly how you read the record. She either never lived here or lived in the house for less than a year. She then donates it to the city of Los Angeles, who is still the owner of it as we speak now. They have started to do some major restorations of the house, and I guess about 2 years, just before the pandemic, They had completed basically the restoration of the main floor and were working on the second floor in regards to restorations. Miss Barnsdale owned the whole hill. There's a little hill around here. It's called Olive Hill, and this house sits on the top of the hill. She was very much an art favorite, and her plan was, even though it didn't actually happen, was to build at the bottom of the hill surrounding the house some studios and residences for some young and upcoming artists, but that did not actually happen. So again, this is completely different now. We're out in Southern California versus the cold Midwest. So you can see Wright is putting on a big courtyard, which makes sense. Again, he's matching the environment of where he's building houses, as we talked about a couple of minutes ago. So there's a view of part of the courtyard. You can see he uses limited amount of art glass windows, not as much as in the prairie style of houses as we saw exhibited from the Roby house in South. Then here's another view from outside. This is the opposite side of the house that we saw 2 slides ago. And so again, you can see the hollyhock design that he has done. I said it was throughout the whole house, and you can see even up on the inside courtyard, you can also see that same design. So it's replicated hundreds of times throughout the house. Sort of a play on the Greek and Romans, and a little mini theater that they would have there with a Roman type statue in the middle and a water feature, which will come into play a little bit further as we go to the next slide. So this is the living room. And Wright pays tribute to his predecessor, so to speak, the Greek and Roman architects. And they considered there were 4 natural elements on Earth, which was fire, water, earth, and air. So pretty easy to see most of them. The fire is pretty easy with the fireplace. Let's skip the water for a second. That's the hardest one. Earth, the mantelpiece itself is earthen in manufacture, and then obviously the air. We have some skylights up top, and we have some windows all around us. So the interesting thing is the water. You're not allowed to take pictures inside the hollyhock house when you're touring it. So this is a stock photograph. But right about here, just away from the fireplace, there is a moat. It's about 12 inches wide, and literally water runs through the moat. It starts right about here on the other side of this, divided by this table, and ends over about here. But there is a moat, and literally the water comes from this feature, runs underground all the way through the courtyard, and this is where the living room is, and it comes up at the fireplace. So he is playing with the 4 natural elements and giving some respect, so to speak, to his predecessors from the Greek and Roman times. This house, also similar to the Unity Temple, is poured concrete, as you can see. When we look at it here from the original photograph that we saw. So questions, comments on hollyhock?
How much was Frank Lloyd Wright involved in the landscaping of his homes?
Okay. In regards to the landscaping itself, he was not involved, other than the flowers that we would see in the houses themselves. Like we saw in the here when we see this landscaping type of thing in the Roby house. But as far as the general landscaping, he wasn't intimately involved. He was very involved in all the furniture. Again, it was the client's decision whether they wanted to build furniture or not. But you can see from the Roby house and this house and at Taliesin, this is all furniture designed by Wright. Some people say that a lot of his furniture looks uncomfortable, and a lot of his chairs are uncomfortable, but they surely fit into and meld with the building itself. I've seen some Wright houses directly and some through photographs where the owners don't have him design the furniture, and putting other type of furniture in these houses, it really takes away from the overall flow and design of the house, or at least in my opinion. So he's very much involved in the inside of the house, limited amount on the actual landscape. So things like, he would have designed this feature as part of the house, but he and would have been involved with the courtyard, but not necessarily the trees that would be planted in the courtyard. So I hope that answers your question.
So was he involved also in the glass work or the glass panes?
Yes, he and his team would design the art glass windows. Every house has, the prairie style of houses all have art glass design. Every prairie style of house that he built, and he built between 60 and 70 of them, have different designs. So as an example, this house, the Roby house, all the windows have the same design, but this is the only house that has this design. Other prairie style of houses have other designs.
Thank you.
Yep, this house, the Hollyhock house, is the last house he builds where every room does have some art glass windows. After that, he really sort of decides that the prairie style house was better suited for art glass windows. He uses art glass windows through the rest of his career, but not through the entire house. He'll have a room or a group of rooms that have the art glass windows, but they're not as all encompassing as they are in the prairie style of house. Other questions? Great questions. Other questions? And then I think I've sort of answered the question in the chat about the interiors are also his design. So yes, they are his design.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Yep. So his most famous structure is Falling Water. So here we see the classic view from the outside looking through. You can see the waterfall. You can see the house just sort of lingering, hanging above the water itself. So this was completed 1938 in Mill Run, Pennsylvania, which is about 45-minute car drive nowadays from southeast of Pittsburgh, so in the western part of the state. Mill Run is on this house right on the edge of a state park, and this is now owned by the Falling Water Conservatory, and they give tours of this. And again, its most famous structure. If you think about this, if we do the math, you'll see 1938 when it's completed. He was born way back in 1860. So when he designs his most famous house, this is when he becomes sort of that star architect word that we use now that wasn't used then. When this house is completed, he's on the cover of Time magazine. And so he's already past our typical retirement age of 65 when this comes through. And as I said earlier, he continues to work as an architect until the day he dies. He's almost 92 years old. This really amps up his career. During the Depression, he, like all other architects, really didn't have much work. And since he had sort of lost his foundation and were at homes, he moved around. He didn't have a lot of work and was slowly in the mid-30s starting to get more work. And then this just really boomed him and put him on the map completely. And then he gets a lot busier again in the 40s and 50s. So Falling Water, the time I toured this, you could not take your own photographs. I understand now you can if you get a certain type of tour. But again, we see some of the same remnants. Wright is trying to what he calls commingle nature in the house. So he put some landscape in the outside of, like you saw in some of the houses, but he likes to have big windows, big open windows, so you can see nature and sort of feel like you're living within nature with the house. Again, as you can see, lots of built-in furniture designed by Wright and his team. Of particular interest is right here around the fireplace. You can see some benches close by, but if you look carefully here where I have the cursor, if you haven't actually toured Falling Water yet, these are two rocks that come up above the ground. So this was not Wright's intention. These rocks actually are natural rocks that come all the way up, help anchor the house itself. But his intentions were, once the house was built, was to file these down to the floor level and make this area the same as the rest of the house. I'm sorry, the rest of the floor here. The family, the Kaufmans that owned this property and had Falling Water, they'd owned this property for quite some time. Mr. Kaufman was the owner of the big department store, Kaufman's Department Store in downtown Pittsburgh during this era. And he had almost barrack-like buildings here, and he would invite some of his employees, the salespeople, to spend a week or two in the summertime here in this almost like barrack-like place. When that deteriorated so much, their only son, Edward Kaufman Jr., was infatuated with Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture, and he put Wright and his parents together, and that's how Falling Water comes. But back to this, Mrs. Kaufman, literally before this house was built or designed, she used to, she was a sunbather, sun worshiper, and she used to lay on these rocks. They were just natural rocks that came up. So they asked Wright not to cut these down and to leave them there. So Wright understood the sentimental value of it. So he did indeed do that. And then he, like I said, he put some built-in furniture close by to protect people from tripping over it. So just some adaptation he did based on the Kaufman's request as the house was being built.
What material is the flooring?
The flooring is a stone. This one's a stone, and it's very well polished. Wright talks about in some of the records, he wants to almost make it look like it's the water, it's the reflection from the water. He tries to make it look like it's flowing, like almost a water piece coming through on that.
Beautiful.
And then we talked about the windows. This is up on either the bedroom or a study up on the top floor. And you can see this is when the window's closed. It's a corner window with it. And then Wright just again playing with that, and he's getting rid of the corner piece of the window. When you actually open it up, it goes away. And again, that trying to commingle nature and the house, just giving you an unusual and different view with no obstacles at all out into viewing nature when you do open the windows. And then here's another picture from the outside. And you can see these are stairs. These are stairs that lead from that main living room that we just saw a minute ago down into the water. So again, you could actually go swimming from the house. You could go down the stairs and go for a swim in the area, obviously just staying away from the waterfall itself. And that's it for that one. So that's Falling Water. So the big thing about Falling Water, of course, is the fact that this house, it's what is called cantilevered, which means that there's no supports out. There's no visible means of support out here. This house, these three levels are just hanging out above the water. Wright loves cantilevering throughout his career and uses it extensively. But this is sort of the ultimate in the cantilevering, that these are just lingering out there with no visible means of support. What's happening is there's some steel beams buried in the floor of these three levels and then are anchored back into the main part of the building back here. This is also where that living room is, where those rocks are. They're helping to support it back in this main area. So that's what makes the house so unique and so wonderful and so much visited.
Does the water flow through the house itself?
No, it goes under the house and only under the house. It doesn't really flow through the house itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was interesting when the Kaufmans, they envisioned having a house somewhere over here and viewing the waterfall from their house. That was what they envisioned. When Wright comes and does a site inspection of it, when he puts his design in, he obviously does something completely different. At first, the Kaufmans weren't sure that they liked it, but they thought about it for a month or so and then gave Wright permission to build the house the way he had designed it, which was something completely different that they had envisioned. So this whole concept of building a house over the waterfall was Wright's alone and not his clients, but they signed off on it from that standpoint. This was served as a weekend home. Again, they lived in Pittsburgh. It was a weekend home from when it was built all the way into the early 60s when the families passed away. Their son, who was the Wright enthusiast, inherited, and then he gives it to a foundation in regards to it. So the foundation now gives tours of the house and owns and maintains the house. So next we go to Taliesin West. We talked about Taliesin up in Wisconsin. So Taliesin West, Wright builds in the late 30s in Arizona. He's getting a lot of commissions out in the California area and then the Arizona area in New Mexico, and he likes the area, especially in the wintertime. So he builds Taliesin West in 37. So from 1937 until when he dies in 1959, basically he spends about half the year, like I said earlier, late spring, summer, and early fall in Wisconsin and Taliesin, and then spend the rest of the year here in Scottsdale at Taliesin West. What's really of interest is at this time from before he builds Taliesin West, he has the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, and he has typically anywhere from 20 to 30 students that are with him. And so they literally would pack up and caravan between the two houses when they moved. So it wasn't just Wright moving, it was the entire school and the staff, support staff, etc. They would go back and forth between the two residences every year, sort of migrating as a lot of retirees do now. Wright's doing it while he's still working, even though he's getting up there in age a little bit, and goes between the hotter Southwest climate and the colder northern Midwest. So this house is built not just as a house for him, but he already has the school established. So it's got some auditoriums for some lectures. It's got some meeting rooms, etc. So we can see another view of the outside of it here. And then this is one view of the inside of it. So this is a meeting area and a relaxing area for after dinner, etc. From that standpoint. So this house, as you can see, has a lot of natural stone from the area, and glass and wood is really what's primarily putting this house together. He actually uses some of the mixture of the concrete is using the desert sand around there, so that sort of the natural colors come through in regards to what is there. Wright, by a lot of experts, was, I would sort of call him an early environmentalist. He's always looking for south-facing views, trying to use natural light to help heat the houses, or in the southern climates, trying to protect the houses from the heat in regards to that. So he's very much oriented and trying to use nature to help heat and or cool the house, depending on where he is, where he's building it. So over the years, this was altered and expanded, just like Taliesin was mostly expanded. I mean, was mostly altered and making constant changes throughout there. But he spent every winter here after the house was built. So Taliesin West is, of these places we looked at, the one place I have not personally visited. So I'd be interested in if any of you have visited, want to add anything further that I missed. I've only seen this via photographs like this and others and research on it, but I haven't physically been to this house. And then a final view of Taliesin West. Even though we're out in the desert, there was some water underground that they found and was able to sort of pump it up and in regards into this lake. Now we're going to go back to Wisconsin, to Madison, which isn't too far from Spring Green. And Mr. Jacob was not a close friend of his, but he knew Wright. And so now we're going to talk about something completely different. So Mr. Jacob challenges him in the mid-30s to build a house for less than $5,000, or no more than $5,000, including the property. So if we go back to 1910, the Roby house cost $60,000 to build, including the property. So now almost 20 years later, or 20 plus years later, he gets this challenge. These become known as the Usonian style of houses. The Usonian's an acronym that Wright comes up with for United States of North America. He ends up building approximately 125 to 150 Usonian style houses. These are not mass produced in that every house looks the same. Wright either physically goes to the property to survey it, or get some very detailed photographs and topographical information about them. but they do have some common characteristics. One, they are usually L-shaped, the early ones especially. They're limited in size to about 1,200 square feet. Again, the early ones, some of them later on stretch out and become over 2,000 square feet. They all have radiant floor heating. So the heating is hot water based below the floor, and it comes up. And they all have a lot of windows, and the centerpiece of the house is the backyard, is the back of the house where all the windows are, and for the view and enjoyment of the family. Again, because of the limited cost, I'll quickly show you the front of the Jacob house. So you can see it's pretty plain Jane, pardon the expression, and not very interesting. Again, Wright does not have a lot of money to build these houses. So he purposely, as we talked about, puts all the ornamentation, all the glass, all the viewing area for the family can enjoy with some privacy in the backyard. So again, the front of the house. So this now is these set of windows where the cursor is, that's these set of windows over here to the left of the screen. So again, he's still using some built-in furniture, a built-in entire wall of bookcase, and then the desk is built in, comes around the corner here. You can see, again, lots of glass, lots of light, and he's using a lot of wood. And then the floor is a lot like the floor in Taliesin in regards to that. Like I say, the heating is coming out from underneath the floor. You can see the dining room here is not quite the same as the dining room of the Frederick C. Roby house. We're talking about a lot less money, but this $5,000 includes the property, all the structures, all the material to build the house, and the built-in furniture also. So questions about the Jacob house or the Usonian houses? So a lot of the Usonian houses are in upstate New York and some in New England. There's some scattered really throughout a lot of the eastern half of the United States, few in the Midwest, a few down further south in the Southeast. So they're scattered throughout, but I would say a majority of them, from what I've been able to tell, are in the New England area.
So is this, I'm sorry, did you say this was owned by a trust or something? Is this also open for tours, or is it privately owned?
This house is sort of strange. It is privately owned, but you can arrange a tour. The state of Wisconsin, through their tourist guide, has something they call the Frank Lloyd Wright Trail, and you can go around and you can actually a few times a year tour this house. But this one is privately owned, and I'm just running through. I think it's the only one that we're going to see that's privately owned. Yes, it is the only one. Just checking back through my list. It's the only one that's privately owned. The Unity Temple technically is owned by the church, but you know, they do give allowed tours of it. So this is the one that's the hardest one to tour, in that you can't just go and go buy a ticket and walk in at any time. So it has to be something that's sort of planned out and in coordination with the Frank Lloyd Wright Trail in Wisconsin.
Gotcha, but a private party doesn't live here, like a family doesn't live here, right?
I don't believe so anymore. That's a question I'm not comfortable answering with certainty, like I have been able to most of the others. It is privately owned, from my understanding. Whether they live there at all some of the year, not at all, I'm not 100% certain. All right. So carport, we're still at the Jacob house. So, sorry, a little excited there. So this is a carport. Now, Wright does not invent the concept of the carport. He does come up with the name, however, of carport. So again, the Roby house we talked about, built 27 years earlier, has a 3-car garage. But of course, because of the financial constraints of how much money he has to build this house, he goes to a carport. Now, we talked about cantilevering before. This one, even though it's sort of shady, there are no supports over on this end. So he actually cantilevers this carport roof also, but he's really playing with it. I believe at least all the other houses I've seen of Usonian style have a carport. All the ones I've seen pictures of also have supports here. He does not play with the cantilevering anymore because it's really too expensive. But that carport concept is used throughout the Usonian style of houses for some protection of the cars itself. And our final stop will be the Guggenheim Museum, completely different than all the others. New York City, right on the edge of Central Park. So now we have where land is a little more expensive, I guess, polite way to put it. So we're going up some. As you can see, it's sort of conical in design, sort of upside down. So this was, as this building is going up, it's completed in 1959. It's open to the public in October of 59. If we remember one of our early slides, Wright dies in April of 59. So the outside of the structure is pretty well completed before he passes away, but they're still working on the inside of it. It was basically getting panned by architectural critics. It was getting panned by artists. It was getting panned by architectural critics, just saying it really looks strange. There would be no flat walls to hang art on. And it really was not very well respected as it's going up. Obviously going up, right in a prominent place in New York City. So it's getting a lot of attention. So here now is the inside of the house. And again, we talked about a lot of his designs were inspired by nature. You can see this almost looks like a shell or a nautilus with this, again, the skylight up top to bring a lot of light into it. After it opens in later 59, it ends up getting rave reviews once people go inside and see it from the artist, the art community, and architecturals. It was getting almost always favorable reviews. So a big change from what it looked like before you could visit it to how it actually looked and how it became and was used as an art museum. And I think, as most of us know, it is still standing, still a working museum. Wright envisioned taking the elevator up to the top and then walking down. Obviously, you can go either way, but you can see that's how you would tour it. And again, lots of light in the museum itself. And then here's a view, the opposite view, looking from straight up all the way down. So that ends the physical tour. I have a couple of wrap-up things to talk about. So if you haven't been real familiar with Wright, or you haven't seen too many of his structures, if you want to know where some of them are, there's another non-for-profit called the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservatory. They do not own any Wright houses. They're basically an advocacy group for people that buy Wright houses and want to restore them. They help them with technical things, etc. The reason why I bring it up is I'm going to see if I can click into their screen live here for a second. If you go over here to the menu, they have a drop-down box here and it says Wright Buildings. And so this literally will tell you by state or by, you see various different ways you can sort this. It lists all the Wright buildings that are still standing. And it also tells you whether, when they were designed, where they are. If you don't filter it, it goes by state. It also tell you whether you can tour the building, if it's open for tours regularly, just at certain times. About 5 or 6 of these are now B&Bs. It will tell you if you can actually stay in it based on an Airbnb type concept. So if you have any interest in, if you're traveling around the country, seeing if there's any Wright houses that you can visit, some of them you can obviously just see from the outside, others you can tour. But this is a very, at least in my opinion, a good link to be able to tour Wright houses or see where they are as you're traveling around the country, or you just want to sort of check them out even before you travel. So I will give you the link to this in the closing email that you get, but it is the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservatory. I'll give you that email, and let me see if I can get back to my screen. All right, can you see my screen still?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So again, that's the conservatory. So just real quick, we covered who Frank Lloyd Wright is. We covered all these things. So I hope I know some of you were already Wright fans from your questions, and others is maybe not. So I hope I piqued your interest a little bit. And